everyone, how's it going? So, this video is not one I actually planned on making into a video, but it's something I've always wondered. You see, one thing that's consistent across Pokemon games is that the main thing you're going to be doing in these games is battling. Battling is key. It's how you gain experience points, it's how you get gym badges, it's how you get past trainers. You're going to be battling hundreds of times in a casual playthrough. But I wanted to see if we could cut a whole lot of those out. What if we tried to go through the game battling as few times as possible? What would that look like, and what would the number end up being? And that's exactly what we're going to do today. We're going to try and get through Pokemon Red by battling the fewest number of times. And in order to do that, we have to define what I mean by battle, and I tried to use a very common sense definition. A battle is any encounter whereby Pokemon are attacking each other. It begins when the first two Pokemon attack and ends when one side can no longer continue. And if you were to battle that trainer again, it would count as a second battle because it's another battle. Your Pokemon are going to have slightly different experience points. So that is what I mean by battle. In terms of wild Pokemon, if you don't run away on the first turn, you're still battling, right? Throwing a Pokeball, that's still in some sort of combat. It's still affecting the Pokemon in some way. I still count that as a battle. So, in order to minimize our battles, we're going to have to run away from as many wild Pokemon as possible until we get repels, and we're going to have to avoid as many trainers as possible. So with that said, let's talk about the first and one of the most important decisions in this run, which starter to pick. Now, initially, I thought this was really obvious. Let's pick Squirtle. Squirtle has great defense, great special, and has access to water moves very early on, which will be great against Brock. Now, the first part of the game is played normally. You already will have a battle right off the bat with the rival. You can win or lose the fight, but I obviously opted to win to get the experience points and go to level 6. Then you get through eventually, after you do all the other intro stuff, you get through Viridian Forest. There is a path you can walk along that'll avoid encounters. But again, I don't count it as a battle if you run away, so it's not a big deal. And you have to battle the bug trainer with the Weedle. This is the only mandatory trainer in Viridian Forest. Pretty easy strategy with Squirtle. Use Tail Whip once or twice, just use Tackle. It really isn't much of a problem. Anyway, then we get to Brock. We can skip the Light Years trainer. And unfortunately, right off the bat, we have a bit of a problem. We don't have Bubble yet. Because we're trying to get the least amount of battles possible, that means we're not going to hit level 8 before Brock, and we're not going to have access to Bubble. That's a small issue, as Geodude has kinda decent attack and very good defense, plus Tackle is not very effective. It is still possible to get past the Geodude, albeit it requires using a ton of potions and a little bit of luck. Geodude has to use Defense Curl enough times. It doesn't really help it to use Defense Curl because I'm already doing minimum damage. You can't do less than 1 with a single not very effective hit. So I'm always doing 1 damage regardless of how many Defense Curls he's using. Nonetheless, it is annoying. But then you level up, and here is where I had an issue. You see, Gen 1 has a bit of a unique mechanic to it, which is when you gain enough experience points to gain multiple levels, you will go right to the highest level. So in this case, you go right to 9, skipping over 8. That would be good if you also could learn the moves you were supposed to learn at level 8, but you can't. In Gen 1 only, when you level up in this manner, you don't learn the moves, you skip. And so, because the experience points from the Geodude is enough to get us all the way to level 9, and Bubble is learned at level 8, we're kinda in trouble. Because, unlike Geodude, Onix knows Screech, and no amount of potions in the world without insane luck is going to allow us to beat the Onix. In addition, we actually don't even have enough tackles. We'd have to start using Struggle, which would just be a whole other problem as we'd be taking recoil damage. The fact of the matter is, this will not work. And I thought I actually had a way around this, but I was wrong, and this wasted a little bit of time. You see, what I thought I would do is intentionally lose the first fight with the rival and do everything else normally, but by losing the first fight with the rival, I thought that I would have just the right amount of experience points to get to level 8 and not skip over to level 9. Unfortunately, I did the math wrong. I literally mistyped, and that was not the case. Even though the Geodude fight is now much harder, you still will not hit level 8. You'll go straight to level 9, and thus the Onix fight becomes practically unbeatable. Again, you know I don't like strategies in these runs that purely involve luck. It can't just be, well, if it uses Bide every single turn, maybe we have a chance. Or if it never uses Tackle. It's gonna use Tackle eventually, and once it gets all its screeches off, that's like basically a one-hit KO. The fact is, it is statistically improbable for you to ever win this fight with this strategy. And I was starting to wonder, oh, darn, is this gonna work? I mean, yeah, of course I could get another encounter, but then we wouldn't have the lowest possible. We'd have an extra encounter that at least theoretically we didn't need. Was there another way to get past Brock and yet avoid an extra encounter in Viridian Forest to get us to level 8? The answer is yes. And we're going to be doing that by using a Bulbasaur. You see, Bulbasaur is actually, in my opinion, the worst starter to do a run with. I mean, not that Bulbasaur is a terrible Pokemon, but if you look at its move pool, it's pretty shallow. Although it has Poison type, it doesn't learn any poison attacking moves, and the strongest move it learns via level up is Razor Leaf, which is only base 55 power. In addition, it's kinda slow, and rather than getting a useful attacking move like Ember or Bubble at level 8, it gets Leech Seed, which in this generation takes 1/16 of the opponent's HP and adds it to yours. So it's not completely useless, but Vine Whip would be way better. I didn't anticipate this going well, but it's not like I really had many other options. Of course, I could have used Charmander, and Charmander does learn Ember at level 9, which would allow it to gain the move before Onix, and it is possible to beat the Geodude and Onix with Charmander, but I just figured Bulbasaur would make things easier, especially for Cerulean Gym. I knew it was going to be very difficult in the early game because you're battling so few trainers, so I figured the best chance for a decent run would be Bulbasaur, with Charmander being an absolute last resort. And so my best bet was to use Leech Seed and Tackle and to see if that would work. And oh boy, did it work. I mean, it worked amazingly. You see, the thing that is kind of interesting about the Onix fight is that Screech can miss enough that it's not guaranteed to use it all the time. And because Leech Seed is doing 1/16 damage every turn, and Onix likes to use Bide, there's actually a pretty high chance you can get through this fight without even using a single potion. Because it only takes 16 turns, plus if some tackles are used, you can get that down to 15. That's actually not difficult, and as you can see by the fight I'm showing you right now, that's exactly what happened. Plus, as you saw just previously, the Geodude section of the fight also goes much easier. And because I didn't need to use items on Brock, I kind of thought, again, never intended to make this a video, wouldn't it be cool to try this whole run without items? I mean, I'd planned it with items, but why not try it without? How bad could it go? And so that's what I did the whole run like it, but it was the plan going forward. I was going to use no items in battle, no extra battles. This may turn out to be a nightmare, but holy moly, did it get a whole lot more difficult to try and get through the game this way. Now, to this point, we have gotten past Brock, and you will see an updated counter every time we get past a gym leader, and we're at 3 battles so far. But that number is about to go up quite a bit, as we try and make our way to Cerulean City. On Route 3 alone, there are 4 unskippable trainers. Here, 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 and here. None of them prove very difficult, and you actually do gain enough experience points to get Vine Whip, which is super useful, but it does add 4 to our counter, making it the most battle-heavy routes in the entire game. Mount Moon, while there are tons of trainers present, you can actually skip almost all of them. One thing we're not going to skip, though, is we can walk around the trainers in this part of the mountain to get the rare candy. These are going to be so useful in the run later on, and so we need to get them. Otherwise, you don't really need anything else here necessarily. So we're going to skip ahead to the end, and here there are 2 mandatory trainers. This Rocket and a Super Nerd. Now the Rocket looks kind of easy. Oh, it's just a Zubat and a Rattata. But he's actually kind of difficult because, well, 2 things. 1, Vine Whip, which is our best move, is double not very effective, so we have to use Tackle, and we have a low base attack, so that's not great. But 2, in Generation 1 only, Bug is actually super effective against Poison, as opposed to not very effective. They actually swapped that later on, which I don't understand, but whatever. That makes Zubats really, really dangerous because a single Leech Life can do a ton of damage and recover a bunch of health. So we kind of have to hope we don't get too many of those. If we don't, the battle goes okay, but it did take me a few tries. Same thing goes for the Super Nerd. He has a bunch of poison Pokemon, all of whom for the early game have pretty good defense. So because of that, you can use Leech Seed. There was a bit of a strategy. I found out that if you just go for Tackle and then Vine Whip the Rattata and then Tackle and get a little bit of luck, it can work. But you can get hit with Screech and that can really make things difficult. So I found that only about 50% of the time. The reason why I did this multiple times, by the way, is one thing I should mention right now is I save all the time. You have to save in this run. Because if you screw up, the run's over, right? Because if I were to lose against that Rocket, Blackout, go to the Pokemon Center and fight him again, I will have gained experience points. It will be a second battle. So I can't have that. Anytime I fight someone I don't intend, I mean, yeah, I guess I could just lose, but then I'm losing money, and it's still a fight nonetheless. Like, I stuck to those rules very strictly. Anytime a trainer caught my eye and they attacked me, it was a battle. I had to keep things consistent, so saving is important. Because of that, sometimes I would forget to save and have to do a battle I already won many times, like the Super Nerd, but it at least allowed me to find a consistent strategy. Once we beat the Super Nerd, we will be at level 16. That will allow Bulbasaur to evolve into Ivysaur, and this is going to be super useful and very timely because we'll be able to fight Misty with Ivysaur's better base stats as opposed to Bulbasaur, so pretty good. Misty is sometimes a problem in a lot of runs I do, but not here. There is a mandatory trainer, which is unfortunate, but pretty easy. Just use Vine Whip. Depending on your special, you may have to use 2, but it won't be too much of a problem. Staryu and Starmie. Staryu takes 2 Vine Whips. Starmie around 4, depending on your luck. She can heal. She didn't in this fight. You may also notice one thing is that the footage looks terrible. Again, wasn't planning on making this a video. I wanted to see how the Nintendo 64's Game Boy Tower compared in quality to what I was using, which was actually an emulator console known as the Retron 5. I was using speed up, so I should make that clear up front. Usually I don't in my runs because I like them to be authentic, but since this is just a theory run, I was using a Retron with the speed up. I wanted to see how the speed up on the Dodrio mode compared. It's actually quite a bit slower, plus the quality is awful, so I will switch back. Anyway, the fight is pretty boring. You just use Vine Whip a whole bunch of times, you win, no issues here. The rival, on the other hand, is quite a bit more challenging. The biggest obstacle is the Pidgeotto. It doesn't have a super effective move, despite the fact that it's a flying type, but it does have Sand Attack. And Sand Attack can make this entire fight just a complete nightmare. Sand Attack has, in theory, a 100% accuracy chance to lower your accuracy, but in Generation 1, all opponent status move have a 25% chance of missing, so you basically have to hope it either doesn't use Sand Attack or it does and it misses. In this particular battle, the Pidgeotto got off 2 sand attacks towards the end, and I had to do this a whole bunch of times. It's not necessarily a huge deal if you get a couple sand attacks, but most likely the battle isn't going to go very well. The next Pokemon is Abra. Abra can't attack, so we're going to gain all our health back. It's why we want to be attacked. The strategy is very boring. You use Leech Seed until it hits, and then you keep spamming Growl. Every turn, you gain a couple HP back until eventually you'll be at or near full health for the rest of the fight. Super convenient thing. Leech Seed once again useful. Awesome. The Rattata, I actually misclicked in the successful battle, but you just want to spam Vine Whip. I actually did use Leech Seed. I don't know how helpful that really was at the end of the day, but you just kind of want to spam Vine Whip and hope it hits. And then the Charmander, it depends how much health you have. So in here, I was actually a little unlucky and I was at low health, and I just got really lucky on the Charmander. You see, AIs in this game have different values, and when the AI is better, it will always use super effective moves against you. But at this point, the rival AI is just kind of standard, so it will just randomly attack. I got all status moves, but either way, I didn't get an Ember. I was at pretty low health, so an Ember would have taken me out, but because I knew that there was a chance it wouldn't use it, I tried to just use Tackle anyway, and after a few hits, it did faint. Either way, happy to get that battle over with. Didn't spend too much time, maybe about 10-20 minutes or so, which is nothing compared to some of the other runs I've done where this rival fight can be an absolute nightmare. So after our 12th battle with the rival, we then have to get past Nugget Bridge. And nothing is difficult about Nugget Bridge, but there are a ton of mandatory battles. There are the 6 trainers, the 5 Nugget Bridge trainers and the Rocket on Nugget Bridge itself. And then on Route 25, there are 4 other trainers that you need to fight. Sometimes you have an option between one of 2 trainers, like these 2 hikers. The way I did this in this run is because I'm a pacifist, I would pick whichever battle had the least amount of Pokemon. I felt it was just fair and in the spirit of the rule to do it like that. So even if it was a less preferable battle, like in the case where I could have fought the hiker instead of the other trainer, I chose to fight the other trainer because they had less Pokemon, 2 to 4 I believe. So it was less Pokemon, more passive. Anyway, that's 10 additional battles. We're up to 22. We talk to Bill, get the SS ticket, and then go down to Vermilion. Now, there are 2 more trainer battles before we get to the SS Anne on Route 6, and there's also the battle with the Rocket. The battle with the Rocket can be a problem because Drowsy can be a little annoying, but it should be fine. We are at a high level, plus Vine Whip is regular effective. The 2 Route 6 trainers are also not a problem whatsoever, even though they're flying types. We're kind of over-leveled for the only time in the run, so perfectly okay. But then we get on the SS Anne, and there are so many cool things here. Items we would use like Body Slam, rare candies, but they're all behind trainers. And because we can't fight trainers, we don't have access to any of them and have to go straight to fight the rival again. And this time, I did spend quite a significant amount of time fighting the rival. And the problem in this case wasn't the Pidgeotto. Sure, the Pidgeotto is beyond obnoxious. It still likes to use Sand Attack, it still does decent damage. But the bigger problem was what came after. Instead of a helpless Abra and a pretty weak Rattata, after the Pidgeotto, you get a pretty decent Raticate, which may use a status move, but can also use Hyper Fang, which deals significant damage. Not enough to knock you out. I usually didn't faint to either the Pidgeotto or the Raticate, but how well the fight went against those 2 would determine if the rest of the fight, which is very difficult, would even be possible. After you knock out the Raticate, the Kadabra will come out, and it can do one of 2 things, and it pretty much has a 50-50 shot of doing either. It can use Teleport, or it can use Confusion. Now, the reason why this is the AI actually is good AI here, but the good AI in Pokemon Red and Blue is so rudimentary, it doesn't actually distinguish between status and attacking moves. All it knows is avoid moves that are not very effective, prefer moves that are super effective. Well, Teleport is a psychic move, so it's super effective, so it will try to go for it sometimes, even though it's a completely useless move. This is a theme throughout the rest of the run, and I basically needed to get teleports. Confusion does so much damage that if I got a Confusion, pretty much was a reset, because Charmeleon, also the AI is by trainer, not by Pokemon. It knows Ember, and it does quite significant damage, around 18 health. And after fighting 3 pretty formidable Pokemon at pretty much their level, I'm not over leveled by any means, I would not survive. There was no way. I could get to the Charmeleon every so often, not even that consistently, and it was about a 4 or 5 hit KO depending on luck, and there was just no way. Ember, usually by the time I was at that fight, 2 or 3 Embers, I was done. And I was stumped. I thought of everything. I did have 2 rare candies, so maybe I level up, but I needed something else. I needed a more powerful move. Oh, Body Slam is here, but it's behind trainers, can't use that. Oh, what about Leech Seed? No, that doesn't really help. I've tried using Leech Seed a bunch. It, didn't really make much of a difference. If anything, it just kind of gives me more opportunity to get attacked. Because all the Pokemon can use pretty powerful attacking moves, you don't have time to sit there and stall. So, I came up with this strategy, and I'm still in shock. It actually worked. So, the first part of the fight is a little luck-based. You have to get through the Pidgeotto and the Raticate without taking too much damage. Pidgeotto doesn't deal that much damage, but it can miss with Sand Attack, and it can use Sand Attack. Basically, you kind of want some Sand Attacks that miss. You need to have enough health. So the idea was to get around 60-ish health into the Charmeleon. So after I beat the Pidgeotto with actually really good health, the Raticate did give me a few problems. It is a 2-hit KO, but if it uses Quick Attack, it might be able to get 2 attacks on me, which is exactly what happened, putting me at 56 health. Still possible to win, but cutting it close. It all came down to the Kadabra. If Kadabra decides to use Confusion, this fight is over. If not, there's a chance I didn't get a Confusion. And then came out the Charmeleon. And as you can see, if you saw my moves flashing, I have the move Bide. The TM that Brock gives you, that nobody ever uses. That's completely useless. But Bide, what it does in this generation is it hits every time, it avoids accuracy checks, and whatever damage you take, it will deal back double. I won't be able to get 4 or 5 hits on the Charmeleon, but a single Bide will be able to take out the Charmeleon. Now, the only thing is, Bide can sometimes take 2 turns or 3 turns, and it doesn't have increased priority, so there is a little bit of luck, because I believe I'm at a speed tie here. I did get the less lucky 3-turn Bide, a 2-turn would have been good enough, but because 56 was just enough health, I do survive the multiple Ember onslaught, unleash the Bide energy, and for the first time in my entire life, no joke, Bide was a useful move that got me through. And you don't understand. When I thought about this, I out loud laughed. I don't record these live because, again, this wasn't even intended to be a video, but I couldn't believe I would attempt this. This is why it's a video. I used Bide in a run, genuinely, not as a meme. This had to work. At this point, I was invested. And you'll notice soon, I even switched back to the Retron to get better quality. Like, no, this had to work. This was just too good. So you get cut from the old man, leave the SSN, and you fight Lieutenant Surge. The hardest thing about this is trying to avoid the trainers while you play the garbage can puzzle. Now, it is completely not intuitive. Here is how it actually works. Only some cans can be first cans, and here are the ones that are supposed to be second cans, but there's a glitch, so the top left is always possible as a second can. It's terrible. And it's why it took you so long as a kid to figure it out, because it's actually broken, and there's no indication this is how it works, but now you know. There are no mandatory trainers other than Lieutenant Surge himself, and the fight goes really well. Electric, not very effective against grass. 2 Vine Whips will take out both the Voltorb and the Pikachu. A couple more for the Raichu, but it has nothing to do much damage. Ivysaur is pretty bulky defensively, so that's pretty good. And we have our 3rd badge, not too shabby. After we beat Lieutenant Surge, although we can skip him, it just made sense to fight him here. There are a couple mandatory trainers on Route 9 that are no problem, and 5 mandatory trainers in Rock Tunnel. The hardest part of Rock Tunnel being, because Ivysaur can't learn Flash, yeah, trying to catch a Pokemon that can would be an encounter. And it was at this point I recognized that Squirtle wouldn't have worked for this other reason. I wouldn't have been able to use Cut. To catch a Pokemon that uses Cut, I would need another encounter, which in a speedrun isn't a problem, but would have been a huge issue for me. I can't believe I didn't even think about that, but luckily the Bulbasaur line can learn Cut, so we are able to progress through the game, albeit we don't have a Flash user. And so I had to rely on this useful map. I got a lot of resources from the speedrunning Wikia because, let's face it, I am trying to avoid a lot of battles, and so are they. There are similar goals here, so there was a lot of really useful information that I knew I could access, like exactly how many battles I would probably need in most areas, although there are a couple optional ones I obviously skipped. Anyway, none of the battles in Rock Tunnel are a huge problem, but there is a really cool thing that does happen. You will gain enough experience points to be at level 31, which is so close to being a Venusaur, and you get Razor Leaf, which works a little bit differently than I initially thought. Now, if you watched my Magikarp run, do you remember that Erica was a huge problem because every time Victory Bell used Razor Leaf, it was a critical hit, and so I couldn't X Special? Well, same thing applies here. Venusaur has good enough base speed, which if we do some quick math, that is a 125% chance for Razor Leaf to be a critical hit. Although Gen 1 has a glitch, so it's actually 255 out of 256, which pretty useful. I don't have a 55 base power move, I have an 110 base power move. That works really, really well. Didn't anticipate that, didn't even think about that. I never really looked into the critical hit mechanic until that Erica fight. So yeah, that's a huge boost. And there is a mandatory fight, which you just saw on Route 8. There are 2 trainers you can fight, the Gambler with 2 fire Pokemon, or the trainer with the Clefairy. Since they both have 2 Pokemon, I chose the easier one, but you can head right to Celadon City at this point, and this is where the run will further be distinguished from a traditional speedrun. You see, I have a bit of a strategy in place for later in the game, but I'm gonna need to use Surf as soon as possible, and there are very few Pokemon that you get for free. One of them is an Eevee, and Eevee can evolve into Vaporeon, and Vaporeon can use Surf. Now, this is not a solo Venusaur run. I can use as many Pokemon as I want, which is a welcome change. But in this case, I wanted Vaporeon so that it could use Surf and be useful later on. For now, I am going to continue with using Venusaur, and I'm going to head to Celadon Gym. Now, Celadon Gym actually looks like it'll be a gym where there are a whole bunch of mandatory trainer fights, but thankfully, there is a path you can take where you only have to fight a single trainer before you fight Erica. And if you watch the Magikarp run and are expecting a really cool fight, I'm sorry, but this is probably the worst fight in the entire run, because Erica also suffers from the good AI problem, and Erica only has grass attacking moves. I'm grass poison. So the good AI, you can't see the air quotes, I just realized that, but it's telling her, oh, use poison moves, those are better, but all her poison moves are status moves. So Victory Bell and Vileplume can't attack. So yeah, this fight is just free pretty much. Tangela has terrible attacking moves anyway. It's nice. Trust me, things will get tougher, but for now, I get to enjoy a free and easy fight, and we have gotten through roughly half the game fighting a mere 36 trainers. So far, so good. But This is where the run is a tad controversial, maybe. And let me just briefly talk about this, because if I don't, people are going to comment about it, so I do want to at least argue why I did things the way I did here. You see, I did make a video on speedrunning. I'm aware of the red and blue any percent glitchless category, which is a similar-ish idea, but again, their goal is to minimize the amount of time versus the number of trainers. But one thing that is in common is the fact that this is supposed to be a run without any glitches. And if I were to use their definition, what I would do here is slightly different. You see, what you're supposed to do at this point in the game is to get the Silph Scope so that you can identify Marowak's ghost and get up to Mr. Fuji at the top of Pokemon Tower. In the speedrun, however, they have figured out that you can actually bypass that by using a Pokédoll, and it will just give you the dialogue that the spirit is at rest, allowing you to continue without the Silph Scope at all. Now, for my run, obviously this would be better, right? That is a bunch of encounters I don't have to have in the Rocket Hideout. That's what I should do, but I didn't. And it's because, with all due respect to the speedrunning community, I completely disagree that this doesn't qualify as a glitch. They argue that because the Pokédoll is essentially doing what it's programmed to do, i.e. allowing you to escape from a Pokemon battle, this would fall under the category of an exploit. And the definition of that being where something acts as the developers intended with interactions they didn't, versus a glitch where it's acting in a way the developers didn't intend, which the Old Man glitch would be an example of that. I'm okay with maintaining that distinction, but for me, there's no way you could say the Pokédoll is acting the way it's supposed to act. It's supposed to be an automatic runaway, and it's useful for underleveled or slow Pokemon, but it's supposed to have the exact same properties as running away. It doesn't. It accidentally, because of an oversight, which is commonly how glitches occur, it has some additional effects that, as evidenced by the fact that they do not do the same thing in Fire Red Leaf Green, Game Freak just messed up. They didn't realize that the auto runaway Pokédoll would allow you to bypass the encounter, because if you try and run away from the Marowak after you get the Silph Scope, the encounter doesn't end. You have to fight it again, proving to me that the Pokédoll is not doing what it's supposed to be doing. Running away should not result in that encounter being over regardless. And so, I personally have always classified this as a glitch, and in order to make this completely glitchless, we have to go through the Rocket Hideout, and that means fighting 3 trainers. Of course, you've already seen me fight the guy who guards the poster, then there's the guy who drops the lift key, and then there's the 2 other Team Rocket members who guard Giovanni's office or whatever. None of them are noteworthy. They're all really easy. Venusaur absolutely destroys. In fact, Giovanni, every single one of his Pokemon go down in just 1 hit. Nevertheless, I did want to do this completely glitchless, and I at least wanted to explain. I know it was a bit of a tangent, but I wanted people to understand who are fans of the speedrun why I changed how this is going to be done, and thus added 4 additional encounters to the total that otherwise wouldn't be there. After we do that, we have to fight the rival, and it's like night and day. The rival fight this time could not be easier. You see, you're not really supposed to fight the rival here. I always did, but based on the way levels are, I think you're supposed to fight the rival first, go up the top of Lavender Tower, figure out you need the Silph Scope, and then go to Celadon, but I know I need the Silph Scope, so I just do it in that order. I believe there's another game where you actually have to do it in the order Game Freak intended, but since you don't, we have a really, really easy fight, even though on paper the rival has a few better Pokemon this time around. However, due to me being a Venusaur and at a higher level, Razor Leaf will 1 or 2 hit KO everything, and the Charmeleon, its Ember, its damage output is quite poor to say the least. But after you defeat the rival, there are quite a few more fights. Now, if you remember again the Magikarp run, this is why the run was impossible. There are a few mandatory channelers, 3 in fact, that you need to use a move that'll affect ghosts, and Magikarp didn't. Of course, we have those now, and the fights are really easy, even though they're not very effective. But there are 3 channelers we have to fight, plus we are going to need to get into a wild encounter because, like I said, the Marowak will not depart until it faints. So, Marowak counts as an encounter, our first wild Pokemon encounter, and then we have to additionally fight the 3 Team Rocket members that are, I don't know, guarding Mr. Fuji. I'm not really sure what they're supposed to be doing here, but whatever, they're easy too. There is a Golbat, and it may give you trouble. It didn't give me trouble, so I can't comment, but nothing too remarkable here. We get the Pokeflute, and it's on to the second half of the game, or at least that's how I usually see it. Now, the second half of the game, there are far fewer mandatory trainers, making experience points very, very valuable. And one thing I almost forgot to put in the video, Snorlax does not count as a battle under these rules, because on the very first turn, just like any other wild encounter, you can run away from the Snorlax. You don't have to catch or defeat it to get it to go away. So I wanted to make sure I clear that up, but I feel it is consistent and within the spirit of the rules. Now, Cycling Path has tons of trainers. None of them are mandatory. That's right, you can do this little zigzag and then just hug the left wall, and you will not encounter a single trainer. I kind of experimented with the best way to go about doing this. When I found you could just hug the wall, I was happy. It even looks like one would see you, but nope. You are not within its cone of vision, and you can go right to fight Koga if you want. Now, I decided to actually go through the Safari Zone. It really doesn't matter. That's just the order I did it in. You can't use Surf until you beat Koga anyway. And Koga himself actually can be a little problematic, so I decided to gain an additional level by making an early stop up at Silph Company. You can go to the 5th floor and get the card key right now. There are, shockingly, only 2 Team Rocket members that you have to fight in the whole building. It is chock full of Team Rocket members, and only 2 are mandatory. That's insane, not counting Giovanni, of course. But you can fight the first one right now. He's just out in the open and get the card key. And I found that made the Koga fight a little bit easier, but this fight can still go poorly just due to the moveset that Koga is running. I should also mention that there are 2 mandatory trainers in this gym as well, which are good for experience points, but bad for our counter up in the top left. But as for Koga, I experimented with a whole bunch of different strategies and actually found one that was the most consistent. Basically, the first 3 Pokemon, you just want to spam Razor Leaf. I'm not even over leveled, I'm only at level 39, and this fight can go quite badly, so just looking at the movesets quickly. Coughing has Smokescreen, Muck has Disable and Minimize, and the second Coughing also has Smokescreen. Because none of them are one-hit KOs, it can be a really trolly fight. It's kind of the way Koga was designed, especially if you play Pokemon Stadium. You'll know just how annoying Koga is supposed to be. But the biggest lucky factor is the Weezing, because it knows self-destruct. If it uses it, I win, right? I don't get the experience points, so I would reset because experience is so valuable, but technically that would be a win. I do want to beat it with Venusaur. I do need Venusaur to keep leveling up. I can't be so under-leveled the whole rest of the way. You want it to use Toxic and Smog as much as possible. Sludge can do some significant damage, and you'll notice I also used a Leech Seed, which ended up making a difference. Just the little bit of health it gives you back can be kind of a determining factor. Just if it uses Sludge too many times, I kind of worked out the math and I did need a little bit more health than I had. So it was a way for Leech Seed to once again be useful, kind of coming full circle here. And then I just kept spamming Razor Leaf. Thankfully, I got a pretty good pattern from him, and Koga wasn't too much of a problem, but definitely way harder than the last couple gym leaders we fought. But because of how many things I did before I fought Koga, this split ends up being the highest in terms of trainer battles at 16, and there are less than that number remaining in the entire rest of the game. So we are really nearing the home stretch here. And while there aren't a lot of battles left, the ones that do remain are quite difficult, so much so that Venusaur will not be sufficient on its own. We need to get it some help. And this is why I had the Vaporeon, because rather than go back to Silph Company, we're actually going to take a detour. we're going to first head to Vermilion, go through Diglett Cave, and head to the museum. Now, at the museum, we're going to get the old Amber, and then we're going to head back down to Pallet Town, surf by once again hugging the left wall. Left walls, not a lot of trainers are there. Kind of guessed it this time, didn't actually know, but it worked. And we're going to go to the Pokemon Lab and resurrect Aerodactyl and our new main Pokemon for a lot of the battles to come, Omanyte. One thing that's very important here is that I do pick the Helix fossil. This isn't just for the meme. There is going to be a lot of use for it later, so keep that in mind. Now, funny enough, if I wanted to and I thought about it, I actually could have finished off with Cinnabar Island. I did go through the Pokemon Mansion and got the secret key. There are no mandatory battles, so we don't have to worry about that. But I could fight Blaine right now if I chose. I just didn't think about it. So I ended up just going back to Saffron and doing the gyms in order, but I didn't have to. Anyway, now that we're at Saffron, there's actually a really easy way to get to the rival without facing any more trainers. On the 5th floor, if you go left, you'll hit a transporter. And then if you walk in this path, you'll get to another transporter that takes you right to the rival. So while there are a ton of rockets, you can easily avoid all of them. And this rival fight is slightly more difficult, but only slightly. It's still really easy, at least the first part. Pidgeot is using Wing Attack, but you might notice it's doing like nothing. This is because Wing Attack is quite low base power in Generation 1, making Flying type just really bad all around. In addition, Execute suffers from terrible AI, so it'll just spam Poison Powder again and again, which is great for me. Gyarados is no problem at all. And although Alakazam does have a super effective move, it doesn't actually know Psychic, so unless they get really under alert, the Venusaur can do nothing against the Charizard. It has Razor Leaf, which is double not very effective, and Cut, which is a terrible attack with a terrible attacking Pokemon. So we're just going to let Venusaur faint to Ember and allow Omanyte to use Surf, which will take out Charizard. Omanyte has amazing special attack. Yes, it's slow, but it has the good special attack. That's why we chose it over Kabuto. And it makes very quick work of Charizard. At this point, I'd actually gone through this part of the game twice, so I was starting to think ahead. There was a saving error. The Retron is very weird the way it saves. There's like 2 different saves. The cartridge has a battery save, and then the Retron has its own like shadow save. It's really weird, and it has to do with the way it reads the ROM. But anyway, I accidentally overwrit the shadow save, so I had to play through the part from after I'd beaten the rival in Lavender Tower all the way back to the present. So yeah, I got really used to that part of the game. Thankfully, because of Fast Forward, it only cost me about a half hour real time, so behind the scenes here. But as I was playing through the second time, I started to not only optimize, but think ahead, and realized I want Omanyte to gain a lot more experience points. Omanyte's going to be really important moving forward, especially because that Charizard is going to be a nightmare to deal with in the subsequent 2 fights. So instead of using Venusaur to beat the next Rocket and Giovanni, I actually use Omanyte, and shockingly, Omanyte not only beat the first Rocket, but he even got through almost all of Giovanni's Pokemon. In fact, if I got a little more lucky, Omanyte would have swept through Giovanni, even though it's so underleveled. So that's pretty incredible. I allowed Venusaur to take it out. I still need Venusaur for a bunch of stuff anyway, so it's not like Venusaur is not going to get any time, but we really need to start getting Omanyte to higher levels, because we are eventually going to want to evolve it into Omastar, and the earlier that happens, the better. But before we can even think about that, we have to first fight Sabrina. And Sabrina isn't as bad as you might think, but she's not good. She definitely is, she can be a problem with some bad luck. Just before I forget, there are a whole bunch of trainers, but none of them are mandatory, so it's just Sabrina. And the first problem we face is the Kadabra. If we look at its moveset, it has both Psybeam and Psychic, and we need it to use Psybeam and not crit. If it gets a critical hit with Psybeam, it's pretty much a reset at that point. It's unlikely things are going to go well. Mr. Mime, on the other hand, is a joke. It likes to spam Barrier, which I don't care. It does have Confusion, but it doesn't like to use it a whole bunch. So Mr. Mime usually not a problem. Venomoth, though, is, because we've got the dual bug poison typing, plus it no problem if we get a Leech Life or a Psybeam, but we want at least some health for Alakazam. Now, Alakazam actually does not know Psychic. It knows Psybeam, Psywave, and Reflect. If you get Psywave and Reflect, Psywave usually doesn't do too much damage, and Reflect does nothing. That's what happened in this battle, and it was easy. Another thing that can happen, since I did do this twice, is she can feint your Venusaur, and then Omanite will just knock out the Alakazam usually. I had a couple battles where I had Omanite. At this point, I was kind of thinking about what level I wanted everything to be at, so I preferred what I did here, where Venusaur just swept through her team. And we get to answer a whole bunch of nice quizzes. One question that always drove me nuts is this one. Caterpie does not evolve into Butterfree. Eventually it does, but the way the question is worded, that's incorrect. Caterpie evolves into Metapod. Metapod evolves into Butterfree. Caterpie is part of the same evolutionary line, but that question, the way it's phrased, is incorrect. I don't know what it says in Japanese, but it really annoyed me as a kid, and it still annoys me to this day. Blaine's, by the way, a complete and utter joke. You can use Venusaur, and Venusaur will actually sweep through his entire team. I may show you that footage if I find it of my first attempt, but because of experience point management, I just decided to use Omanite, and there really isn't much strategy here. Omanite is double not very effective. They do use Fire Spin, all his Pokemon, or most of his Pokemon use it pretty often, so that's pretty annoying, even though it's double not very effective, because trapping moves in Gen 1 just don't let you attack, and because I'm slower, you basically have to hope for a miss. That's pretty annoying, and theoretically, it could cost me a battle. It didn't. But yeah, that's it for Blaine, and now we're on to Giovanni again for the third time. There is a couple trainers we actually need to fight here, and I chose to use Omanite as much as possible. At this point, I'm really thinking about trying to get Omastar as quickly as I can, so the more Omanite participates in battle, the better. Giovanni, however, has some Pokemon that can just wreak havoc on Omanite, so I did do the Giovanni fight a few times, and in this particular battle, I actually got past the Dugtrio. Usually Dugtrio was one I had a lot of trouble with. It could use Dig, and it's super effective. Dugtrio, decent attack, and I'm under-leveled. But in this case, I actually got past all his Pokemon until Rhydon used Fissure. So that's a little unlucky. Omanite could have gone through the team, but I was pretty happy. I was, content with this being my final attempt. The one thing is, I'm a little disappointed for the sake of this video that the latter gym leaders are so easy, but don't you worry. If you want difficult trainers, wait a few minutes, we're getting there. But before we tackle the toughest trainers, let's acknowledge that we've gotten through the entire game, the 8 gym badges, up until the Elite Four with 62 battles. That's it. I know it sounds like a lot, but when you think about how often you battle in Pokemon, like the Magikarp run was probably 600 battles, that's crazy. But it's just the last 6. Essentially, the problem is, although none of the individual Pokemon I fought were terribly difficult, they kind of just took off health little by little, and I was unable to get past the Gyarados with Venusaur. Pidgeotto knows Agility now, and Wing Attack. And it's good it knows Agility because bad AI tells it to use the Psychic move, but it's also at a higher level, so Wing Attack's going to start doing more damage, and it only has to use it a couple times for the Gyarados to knock out the Venusaur in 1 or 2 attacks. And at that point, Omanite just isn't at a high enough level, nor does it really know any... It can't learn Rock Slide. I know everyone thinks just use Rock Slide. It doesn't learn that in Gen 1. I don't get it, but it can't. So I don't really have anything good to use against Gyarados. Thankfully, I do get a move you may have noticed when I beat the Pidgeotto that is insanely useful, and we're going to be using it a whole bunch, and that move is Growth. So Growth has done all sorts of different things over time, but in this generation, it raises your special by 1. But since special is both offensive and defensive, it's insanely overpowered. Essentially, it is Calm Mind in Generation 1 prior to Calm Mind being a thing. That's excellent. Unfortunately, Gen 1 giveth and Gen 1 taketh away. In Generation 1, critical hits don't just ignore your opponent's buffs, so their increase in defense and whatnot, they ignore yours as well. So, a critical hit Razor Leaf doesn't get any boost from 6 growths. It will do the exact same amount of damage as just a regular critical hit Razor Leaf. And since Razor Leaf always critical hits and it's my only grass attacking move, that's an issue. Thankfully, we do get a move I would never think to use normally, but in this circumstance actually works insanely well, and that's Mega Drain. It's pretty weak, only base 40 power, but combined with growth, we're able to do pretty significant damage, plus heal without using an item, making it a doubly useful move and a great way to get past this rival fight. Let me show you. The Pidgeot part goes the exact same as before. Use a bunch of Razor Leafs, try not to take too much damage, and then delete Bide and get growth. The next Pokemon he sends out actually isn't Gyarados, it's Rhyhorn. I just didn't feel like mentioning it before we talked about the real battle. Rhyhorn's easy. Single Razor Leaf, done. Now, Execute is the linchpin to this whole strategy, because Execute still doesn't attack you. It just spams Poison Powder, which means I can safely get off 6 growth and then use a Mega Drain to get all my health back, which makes the rest of this fight a complete joke, in theory. You see, Mega Drain is still pretty weak, so it doesn't even one-hit KO the Gyarados, and if you get a critical hit, like I said, you do lesser damage. And if they get a critical hit, it ignores your buffs, which thankfully didn't happen in this particular battle, but either way, I'm going to allow Venusaur to faint here to allow the Omanite to get the experience points. This is really about EXP management, and I have an idea of what level I need everything to be at, so while very close, I was able to finish out the battle with Omanite. Again, I would have been able to finish it with Aerodactyl or something, but it's really important to gain levels here, because the Elite Four is just a lot more powerful than the rest of the game. In fact, in real time, I spent more time trying to beat the Elite Four than I spent on the rest of the run combined. The Elite Four is brutal. There is just so much that can go wrong, and it took me forever to come up with strategies. But before we talk about them, I should mention that you can get through Victory Road without fighting a single trainer. I also should mention that I collected a whole bunch of items I needed. Elixirs, rare candies, some calciums to boost my special. Little things here and there that I did just to give myself a fighting chance. I bought some revives and then saved outside the door and proceeded to lose again and again. Because the Elite Four has several points that are just easy losses. And let's talk about each one of them. The first is Lorelie. Lorelie you think would be easy. She uses a bunch of water Pokemon, and I have a grass Pokemon. Unfortunately, they all have pretty good special, and Ice is super effective against Venusaur, so I've got to be careful. What I ended up doing is a strategy both to get Omanite a few more levels for a later fight, and a consistent way to make Lorelie not the worst. Basically, what I would do is attack with Omanite twice. Why? Well, Dewgong's AI will tell it against Omanite to spam Rest, since it's the only move that it thinks is regular effective. If I hit it once, it will rest, and that will take 2 turns where I have free moves, essentially. If I hit it again, that's 2 more turns. And we're going to need a bunch of turns because we're going to swap in Venusaur and try and get off 6 growths. If I get hit too much, it can be a problem, but it's not even about the number of hits. For whatever reason, Dewgong will never use Aurora Beam like the maximum number of times. It'll always use Rest at least once. I don't know why this is. I had like 100 battles against Lorelie. The closest I ever come was like 20 health. It was never able to feint it with just Aurora Beams on their own. What the problem is getting a critical hit. Critical hits can be kind of overpowered faster Pokemon get them more often than slower Pokemon, and all the Pokemon she has are fast enough that crits are relatively common. And a crit one-hit KOs the Venusaur every single time, nothing I can do about it. So the reason I would use the second attack is to try and get Dewgong to attack as little as possible, lessening the chance for a crit. Once you get rid of the Dewgong, Cloyster and Slowbro aren't a problem. Cloyster, I've been hit with an Aurora Beam. As long as it doesn't crit, you're fine. Slowbro will just spam Amnesia. So if you get a crit, which does happen, the only thing you need to do is just hit it with a Razor Leaf. That will automatically crit and ignore its boosts. Jynx is really annoying. Jynx, I kept calling it Troll Jynx, but it really is the trolliest Pokemon Lorelie has because it outspeeds me, gets crits a lot, and can freeze with Ice Punch. So this is where I'd lose a whole bunch of Lorelie attempts. I would get to the Jynx, it would use Ice Punch, freeze me, crit me, or I would hit it with a Mega Drain, which is a 2-hit KO. It doesn't matter if I crit or not, it's always a 2-hit KO unless I get 2 crits in a row. But I got frozen or critted a whole bunch. Lapras, similar story with Blizzard, but it can miss, and I'm faster, so it only gets off 1 attack. But that's 3 attacks where I can either be frozen or get a critical hit against me. And freezing in Generation 1, you can't thaw out. You're just a sitting duck. I don't even know why it doesn't just automatically faint you. I don't see the point, but don't get frozen. So while the fight isn't difficult, if I get any amount of bad luck, it's an automatic loss. So it's an annoying fight. And because of my whole, you have to save before, you can't save every time after, I really was sick of Lorelie by the end of it. I think you can tell, but Bruno, on the other hand, is a joke. Like, a complete joke. You can sweep Bruno with Omanite, but because of a miscalculation, once again, I can't believe I did this so much in this run, I wanted it to hit level 40 after taking out Bruno's team, which it can do. There is a bit of luck involved here, because Bruno can sometimes just choose not to attack you. You will always take out the Onix in 1 hit, and the Hitmonchan is 2 hits, but it doesn't know a fighting move, so you're good. Hitmonlee, however, it can spam X defends, use Mega Kick, or use Jump or High Jump Kick. If it uses those, your Omanite will faint, and it's not the end of the world. Like, it just makes it 1 level lower going into Agatha, but I'd rather that not be the case. In the fight that ended up being the final one, I obviously got the best luck, but there's a reason for that. I actually don't want Omanite to sweep because it won't gain the level, and I'm going to use a rare candy to evolve it into Omastar. It needs to be Omastar for the next fight, and any extra XP I get will just be wasted. Venusaur, however, will level up, which is useful, so I would just let the Omanite faint. It will never attack Venusaur, which is super useful, so if I got lucky on the Lapras, and Venusaur didn't get attacked, or Blizzard missed, or it did whatever, then I would have full health without having to use one of my few potions. Money was kind of a problem because I bought some calciums and whatnot. I thought that was more important than potions since I really shouldn't need too many. But that was the Bruno fight, and neither of these are the problem. The problem is Agatha. Agatha makes me want to do this run again. I now have a strategy for Agatha, but I didn't just comprehend how horrible this fight is in this run. Let's take a look-see. Agatha has 5 Pokemon. 2 Gengar, a Haunter, a Golbat, and an Arbok. 4 of those Pokemon know moves that can confuse you. 2 of them have moves that can put you to sleep, including her very first Pokemon, the first Gengar. And Sleep in Generation 1 is crazy overpowered. In Generation 1, unlike the current generation where Sleep can last anywhere from 1 to 3 turns, here it lasts from 1 to 7 turns. 7 turns. And that's not even technically true, because on the turn you wake up, in Generation 1 alone, you cannot attack. So, if you're hit with a Hypnosis, it's done. It's done. And my Pokemon also, if I use Venusaur, it barely does any damage. I can't even get off enough growths before getting put to sleep. Plus, it knows Nightshade. It's a set damage move. It does 50 damage every turn. That's really significant considering it's a 3-hit KO on both my powerful Pokemon. I tried to run through every alternative, leveling up Venusaur a whole bunch, leveling up Omastar a whole bunch, trying to use some of the other Pokemon. Nothing was working. And every time I would lose, I'd have to go through Lauralee and Bruno all over again. It was driving me insane. So I finally took a break and decided to think. What I'm doing doesn't work. Omastar does do decent damage with Surf, but it's getting put to sleep. I have no way to defend myself. I get outsped. Venusaur can't do any damage, and my other Pokemon are too weak. I can't gain more experience points. What the heck can I use? Nothing can learn Psychic or Earthquake. There are no powerful attacking moves. Growth Mega Drain will not work here. What is the strat? I thought long and hard. I looked through every Pokemon, thought of every move, and finally came up with the most inane strategy you can imagine, and it worked. Yes, more inane than Bide. We're gonna use Mimic. Now, Mimic is literally a move I had never used in any Pokemon game up until this point. I don't even remember exactly what it did, but let me tell you because it's important. Mimic basically allows you to pick any one of the opponent's moves and use it as your own. Now, I think you can imagine why I wanted Mimic. The only way I'm going to slow down the Gengar and the rest of Agatha's team is if I can use Sleep against her. And none of my Pokemon, unfortunately, can learn sleeping moves. Venusaur will eventually if I kept leveling it up, but I don't even know if that would have been that effective because it would have taken levels away from Omanite or Omastar at this point, and I just don't know if that was the best plan, and I didn't think about it. Honestly, I didn't envision Agatha being so difficult. The thing I really missed is that Special is both attack and defense. I know that. I've been saying it the whole run, but I sometimes don't internalize that. I just expect Gengar and Haunter to have really weak defenses, not remembering, well, in Generation 1, it has super good defenses on Special because its special attack is so high. I'm still thinking in Generation 2 and beyond terms for a Generation 1 game, and it was a huge mistake. I'm doing so much less damage than I ever thought I would have to this thing, and it's entirely my fault. So the only way we're going to get around it is by using Mimic. And the strategy I came up with is still not consistent. I don't like luck strategies. I hate them. I think it's boring to watch, and I think it ends up just making the game a dice roll. But unfortunately, I feel somewhat justified against Agatha. All her moves are luck-based. Does she choose to use Confuse Ray? And does Confuse Ray actually make me hit myself in confusion? Does Hypnosis hit? How long am I asleep for? Does she choose to use Dream Eater randomly? She'll do that a whole bunch. Basically, here's the tier list of things Agatha can do and what I want. Top tier, use Dream Eater. Tier 2, use Hypnosis and it misses. Tier 3, uses Confuse Ray and it doesn't do very much. Like, it hits, but I don't get confused for very long. Tier 4, same thing, but I do get confused. That's bad, but not the end of the world. Tier 5, Nightshade, still bad, but salvageable. And Tier 6, a automatic reset, I get put to sleep. If Omastar is asleep, it's done. It's done. There's nothing I can do at that point. Omastar can get put to sleep later, but right now, I need it to not just put Gengar to sleep, I need it to start doing some serious damage. Oh my god, I hate this fight. Guys, this fight sucked. So anyway, I battled her like 50 times, and yes, I saved in front. I broke my rule, but there's no point. Like, the point to do that is to avoid luck-based strategies, but with what I did up till this point, unless I came up with a completely different strategy, which I thought about, If I redid the run, I think there's a strategy that would make Agatha consistent, but at this point, there was no way not to do a luck-based strategy because all her moves are inherently luck-based. What she used, if she switched out Pokemon, what they used, it was all just, you know, it could go so well where she just uses Dream Eater randomly, and it can go so badly. Prior to the fight, just so you know, I leveled up Omastar with rare candies, which is why it's at level 45. I tried all sorts of combinations with levels. I found that Omastar being at level 45 was the best strategy for defeating her the most consistently. Anyway, the successful battle started. I used Mimic, but obviously she outspeeds, and she used Hypnosis, but it missed. I copy Hypnosis. She tries Hypnosis again. It misses. I try Hypnosis. It misses. She tries Hypnosis for a third time. It misses. Very statistically improbable, by the way, but my Hypnosis doesn't miss. Now that she's asleep, I have at least a couple turns to just spam Surf. Unfortunately, she didn't stay asleep for very long, but it was enough to put her within range of using a Super Potion, and thankfully, once she used the Super Potion, her next attack was to use a Dream Eater, which failed, obviously, and I was able to get past the first Gengar. A huge hurdle, but by no means am I in the clear. Now this part's actually kind of funny. The Golbat comes out and uses Supersonic, which does hit. It makes up for my good luck, and I hit myself in Confusion. It then uses Haze, which has the unique effect of eliminating statuses like Confusion, so I go for Blizzard, and because I'm not confused, it hits. It's not a one-hit KO, but I just thought that was really funny how it helped me out with that Haze. Now, I got a little lucky that my Blizzard actually froze the Golbat, and I was thinking, is there a way I can set up or do anything? But really, no. Even if I swapped in Venusaur, although it will just stay frozen, she does switch Pokemon, and Venusaur just doesn't do enough damage. I tried using Venusaur so much. It's a little lucky that I get a free attack against the Golbat, but not as helpful as you might think. Now, the Haunter decided to finally use Nightshade, and you can see how deadly Nightshade is. Thankfully, I used Hypnosis and it hit. That luck was short-lived as Haunter would wake up on the very first turn, allowing me to get one free attack, but you kinda hope for the 7-turn Hypnosis, not the 1 turn here. Agatha decided to switch into Arbok, and my Surf, intended for the Haunter, does about half damage. She tries for a Screech, which is perfect. If it hits or not doesn't matter because none of her Pokemon have physical attacking moves. I use another Surf. Down goes the Arbok. Now, because the Haunter is at pretty low health, I decide to be aggressive and go for a Surf. She decides to switch into Gengar. I'm perfectly okay with this. Free damage is free damage. I decide to go for a Hypnosis on this Gengar since you can see Surf's not doing very much. I miss. It uses Nightshade. I go for another Hypnosis, but alas, another Nightshade. Down goes Omastar, but it did a good job. Hopefully the rest of my team can pick up the slack. Now, one Pokemon that's way more useful than you'd think is the level 30 Aerodactyl. It knows Fly, because I like to use it to fly around places, but Gengar has such weak defense that it actually is a decent idea to use it against Gengar. Now, this Gengar doesn't actually know Hypnosis, so it can't put me to sleep. It can confuse me, however, which is what it did, and I even got hit in Confusion. I'm trying to go for an Agility to outspeed it, and then just spam Fly over and over again. While I'm confused, I will go for Wing Attack to avoid getting hit in Confusion on the first turn of Fly. Thankfully, this time it used a Toxic that missed and a Dream Eater that failed, so I haven't been hit with anything other than myself in Confusion. Now that I'm not confused, I just start spamming Fly. She decides to swap into Haunter, which I'm okay with. Haunter is even weaker than the Gengar. I just need to take out the rest of her Pokemon. It uses Nightshade, but at this point, the battle is over. A failed Dream Eater later, and my Fly hits, and she is down to her last Pokemon. I missed with the Fly, but thankfully on the turn I was vulnerable, she used a Dream Eater. Very great when that happens. She then hits me with a Toxic, and my Fly just about takes her out, but not enough, and it's enough for her to use a Super Potion, so it ended up being even worse that happened. It was so close. Anyway, I misclick. I meant to use Wing Attack. I used Fly, and that was it for Aerodactyl. It did a good job. This is so close to fainting. I just need my final 3 Pokemon to close this out. Venusaur was up next, and thankfully, due to its bad AI, it decided to use Dream Eater twice, probably because it's a psychic move. On the third attempt, it did use Nightshade, all the while I was spamming Razor Leaf, and a few turns later, the battle was over. I was overjoyed, and we get to go to Lance, which I've actually made it to before. That wasn't my first win with Agatha, that's just the first time I saved in front of her, because Lance is also really difficult. Isn't that fun, guys? Unlike Lorelie, our reward for a hard fight is a harder fight. In a way, it's more consistent, but Gyarados, oh my, Gyarados can be really obnoxious. Now, Gyarados knows Leer, Dragon Rage, and Hyper Beam along with Hydro Pump. It won't use Hydro Pump against Venusaur, which I lead off with, but if I get a Leer and a Hyper Beam, that's a feint, and battle's over. The strat, if you will, is just to spam Razor Leaf. I was bold, and even though I got hit with a Leer, I stayed in for a Razor Leaf, but eventually, I decided it was smarter just to put in Lapras and allow it to feint. Lapras is too under level to do anything useful except be a meat shield, so it served its purpose well. In addition, it got off a couple growls as well, which lowers Gyarados' attack, making it a lot less threatening. I didn't even think about potentially doing that, I just figured it would Hyper Beam and I would feint. Additionally, if Hyper Beam caused a Pokemon to feint, it doesn't have to recharge, I know, really cheap. So, yeah, Gen 1 everybody, but that didn't happen. It decided to go for Dragon Rage twice. Really lucky that that happened. Anyway, with Venusaur back out, I go for a Razor Leaf, it decides to go for a Leer, it doesn't hit, another Razor Leaf takes it out, and that is what Venusaur needed to do in this battle. I'm going to swap to Vaporeon, as Venusaur being around is still pretty useful, it's still one of my most powerful Pokemon, but I'm just going to spam Sand Attack until the Dragonair causes my Vaporeon to faint, and eventually, as you could expect, I'm going to swap in Omanyte, which knows Blizzard. However, it just kept using agility, so I got bored and decided, alright, if you're gonna let Vaporeon live, then I'll let it live. I love Vaporeon, one of my favorite Pokemon. I don't need to see it faint. Come on, Omastar, let's make it pay. It goes for a Dragon Rage, which misses because of my Sand Attacks, and I decide to use Mimic, because although I won't outspeed the max speed Dragonair, I will outspeed the rest of the team, which is pretty useful, so Mimic coming in handy for a second straight battle. Who would have thunk it? Anyway, I used the agility, and then I decide to just go with Blizzard. Another Dragon Rage miss, one hit KO with Blizzard, and I'm at level 46, pretty good. Dragonair 2 comes out, I use Blizzard, it hits, Dragonair 2 is fainted. Aerodactyl comes out, I go for a Surf, it uses Hyper Beam, does nothing because of my stellar defense. Aerodactyl down. Finally, Dragonite, I just need to hit and I win. I go for the Blizzard, I hit, and I don't win. It actually survives on 1 health, but it used Hyper Beam, so I was good. I thought it would take it out in 1 hit, but apparently I was wrong. Doesn't matter, it all works out. I have enough potions for the final battle. I save once again because I've already done it, and I just want to get this over with. This has been a long and grueling experience, and the champion is not going to be any easier. Let's just take a look at his team before we talk about the battle. The Pidgeot has Mirror Move now, which can prove to be a little annoying, considering I'm going to lead off with Omastar and spam Blizzard. If I get frozen, that's pretty obnoxious, and it can happen. Additionally, it can use Wing Attack and Sky Attack. I want it to use as little attacking moves as possible. I'm really going to need my health here. And once again, we have a battle that's luck-based, because Alakazam can just end me. It knows Psychic. If it uses Psychic, it's not a one-hit KO, but I basically need it to use either 2 Psybeams and a Reflect, which it'll randomly spam, a Psychic and 2 Reflects, or 3 Reflects. Anything else, like 2 Psychics or 3 Psybeams, which is much more common, I lose. There's no chance, there's nothing I can do. It's too fast, it's too strong, its special is too high. I hated this fight. Again, I have a way around this now that I've thought about it, but man, I wish I would have thought about this beforehand. I don't like fights like these. Anyway, that's enough talking about the battles that weren't good. Let's talk about the one that was. So, he sends out his Pidgeot, I go for Blizzard, he goes for Wing Attack, it does like 9 damage, and of course Blizzard misses. Thankfully, he also gets a Blizzard miss, pretty useful. Another wing attack, 9 damage, not too bad. Surf takes out the Pidgeot, and then comes Alakazam. It goes for Reflect, pretty good. I go for Surf. It did a crit, that's pretty good too. It's going to be a 3-hit KO anyway. It goes for Psychic, which is fine. I get the Surf, and Alakazam is done. The hard part is over. Surf against the Rhydon, I outspeed the Rhydon down. Now, we're going to have to deal with the Exeggutor. Blizzard will not take it out in one hit, so I'm going to swap into Lapras just to absorb this Stomp, so I can actually swap into Aerodactyl and spam Fly once again. I outspeed, and I use one Fly, it crits, which is pretty lucky. The only attacking move it has is Barrage and Stomp, which is more of a problem than you'd think due to the fact that Omastar is at such low health. And I needed to have sufficient health for later in the battle, so Aerodactyl is really needed to do some heavy lifting here. Thankfully, it does its job, takes out the Exeggutor, and we're on to the Gyarados. Aerodactyl, I wish I could give you a better fate than what's about to happen, but Hydro Pump 1 misses, Hydro Pump 2 does not miss. Thank you, Aerodactyl. What a great Pokemon for something I never leveled up. Now it's time for Venusaur. It gets hit with a Leer. I use Razor Leaf. I just need to keep spamming it and hope the Gyarados doesn't use Hyper Beam. It does, but it misses, so that was really lucky. And the second one does hit. That's going to take out Venusaur, especially with the critical hit, and it's not looking good. If I get hit with a Hydro Pump, it's over, but Hydro Pump misses. The Blizzard takes it out, and I just have the Charizard. I just need to one-hit KO with the Surf / crits. Surf, it's not a one-hit KO. But don't worry, I survived the Fire Blast, and I win. Oh yeah! This was a crazy battle. I'm really happy. I'm much happier than I like to admit. I would have loved Hydro Pump, by the way. That would have been pretty useful. Again, hindsight 2020, this was a theory run. This was not a video. In my videos, you have no idea how much time I spend thinking about planning. Of course, things go wrong. I can't anticipate everything, but I was so happy this worked. And our final total at the very end of this is 68 battles, 67 trainers, 1 wild Pokemon, the Marowak. I'm sure some of you would have liked one more battle for some reason, but those are all the battles you need to beat Red and Blue, with no glitches and no items. That's it for this video though, guys. Now, my questions are, would you want to see my improved strategy that'll make these fights consistent? I don't mind posting that up in a couple days or so because I kind of want to do it anyway and see how much time I can save. And I don't know, I find this run kind of cool. The other question is, did I screw up? Did I either miscount, which is very possible, or did I add a trainer I don't need to? And do you agree with me on the glitch exploit debate? Let me know in the comments. Helps the algorithm. Anyway, guys, thanks for everything, and take care.